We begin by seeing a young man named David inside a recreational center. He ends up having nightmares about a group of men attacking him, which makes him have uncomfortable nights in that place. The next morning, we see more young people arriving at the penitentiary, and guard Brian welcomes them. He then takes the young Luke to meet the other colleagues in his cell and asks him to behave. When left there, the young man notices that the other companions are not very pleasant. Among them are Jethro and Blue. The inmate Steve insults him about the choice of beds. When he opens the clothing locker, Luke discovers David inside, scared because he was constantly bullied by the others. To instill more fear in the newbie, the despicable Steve, who leads the cell, asks one of his partners, Lewis, to put another young man named Lindsay in the locker. Later, the group of inmates is taken to a room where there are classes on behavior and emotional expression. Some do not want to express themselves, but Luke has the opportunity and destroys the dummy for use. When the group is working, Lindsay enters the supply room and hides along with David, as Steve wants to bother them again. He and his partner Lewis enjoy playing pranks on the young men and end up finding them, forcing them to stand still while they urinate on them. Later at night, Luke wakes up disturbed by the new place and gets up to urinate, but ends up slipping on something. When he opens his eyes wide, he notices that he has fallen into a pool of blood, which unfortunately belongs to David, the young man who could not withstand so much mockery from the others and ended his life. The next morning, the cellmates wait anxiously for the guards to arrive, fearing that they will place the blame on them. Brian enters and orders them to behave when receiving the governor and David's father. The man enters the cell and questions the group if they knew the young man well, but no one speaks up. The governor lectures everyone, knowing that the others did not help the deceased and that some even despised him. Before leaving, he also blames guard Brian and the supervisor of the penitentiary. Upset with the lecture, the supervisor orders Brian to give the young men a lesson and commands that they be taken to the island of punishment. The next day, the group of young people is taken to an island isolated from the mainland, and some go smiling, thinking it is more of a trip than a punishment. The group is left there, and the boat departs. The location has an old military installation, but it has been abandoned and transferred to the prison department. The young men are taken into the forest, and one of them, hearing noises, questions whether the island is uninhabited, which Brian affirms it is. After the group walks for hours, they reach a secluded part of the forest where they will camp. While the group settles, Luke observes a handcrafted necklace hanging from a tree, which leaves him thoughtful. Jethro complains about mosquitoes, which makes Steve mock him disrespectfully. Brian calms them down and asks Luke to fetch water from the river. The young man leaves to get water, and when he is returning, he finds another handmade scrap. He begins to hear strange noises, which makes him fearful, so he rushes back to the group. Suddenly, something hits him and knocks him out. Anxious about the delay, Brian decides to go find Luke, but as he follows the path to the river with the others, he finds him lying down. They observe an injury on his head and question what happened. The young man does not know for sure, but believes that someone hit him. The group continues the excursion and later enjoys a bath in a stream. Later, they continue walking across the island until they find a camp, apparently inhabited. Lindsay pauses to urinate while the others don't stop. Soon, someone knocks him down and knocks him out. The group approaches the camp and comes across Louise. She introduces herself as the leader of another group of delinquents, just like Brian, who thought it was only them that week. Her group consists of young women, and one of them was the one who knocked Lindsay down, thinking he had spied on them previously. Louise asks Brian to take his group away from the young women, which he does shortly afterward. At the camp, he assigns tasks to the young men. Steve and Lewis go in search of an ancient monastery. Jethro and Blue go looking for another safe place to camp. And finally, Luke and Lindsay go to find the natural harbor on the northern side of the island. While Jethro and Blue question each other about the idea of crossing the river and going to the girls, Luke does not like Lindsay's company and tells him to walk alone. Back with Steve and Lewis, they find the monastery, and there lives an older man. They chase him inside and confront the man, trying to impose fear. The man tries to defend himself with a wooden staff, but is disarmed and beaten by Steve. It is not long before Luke arrives at the monastery and finds the old man dead. His body is as if it had been bitten. The scene is seen by the two girls, Jennifer and Mandy, but the moment is misinterpreted by them, who decide to call their instructor. Minutes later, while Luke washes himself in the river, he is surprised by Brian and Louise, who believe that the young man committed such evil. When everyone gathers, Steve and his partner claim that they did not find the place, justifying that they are not to blame for anything. Louise observes the deceased's body and notices several bite marks, something that a human cannot accomplish. Brian, knowing that the excursion is going bad, asks Louise to call for transport, but she says that her phone is missing. They return to the boys' camp, and Brian arrests young Luke, while Louise suspects that he cannot be the culprit. When the guard goes to look for his device, he discovers that it has disappeared and then questions the delinquents who took his phone. Steve wants to act tough and assert his leadership in the group, which is quickly undermined by Louise, who disarms him and confronts him about the device. But like him, no one knows about its disappearance. Hours pass, and Louise's group joins the boys to spend the night. When she offers to feed Luke, Brian advises her about the serious crimes committed by the young man, and that she should be careful. However, the woman risks it anyway, as she does not fear young men like him. Later, in the early morning, Louis and Jennifer have a romantic moment when they hear something in the forest, but they don't pay attention and continue their relationship, not noticing that Steve is watching them with a malicious look. In the morning, Jethro gets up and goes to fetch water from the river when suddenly he hears a growl right in front of him, and something attacks him. With Jethro's delay, Brian confronts Blue, who should have gone with the young man, but now, with the delay, he will have to go alone in search of his partner. The young man is against the idea and prefers to go in pairs with Lindsay. The two then head to the river and yell for him, but what they find is only one of the inmates' arms being carried away by the current. Minutes later, both return to the camp screaming, declaring that the young man is dead and say that the island is inhabited by someone. Suddenly, Brian is hit by 2 arrows and the others run to take cover. When Louise goes to help her friend Brian, she is nearly killed by another arrow. Luke goes to help them when they hear whistles and barks from what seem to be ferocious dogs. Brian tells them to run as the dogs are approaching, and after the two flee, we see several canine animals surrounding guard Brian's body. When the animals hear the whistle, the dogs begin to attack Brian's body and unfortunately kill him. Then, the animals continue the chase, and curiously, after Luke falls, they surround Louise on a cliff and knock her down. Minutes later, the group of delinquents is at the camp, and Luke frees himself from the handcuffs. When asked about the instructor, he says that the woman died. Jennifer wants the group to stay together and tells the group about the other side of the river, claiming they should head for the old army cabin. Along the way, Luke sharpens wooden stakes and hands them to the others to defend themselves against the dogs in a future encounter. After walking for half an hour, the group comes across Jethro's dead body, hanging under a tree with a sign on his chest with the letter D. Terrified by the possibility that someone is hunting them, the group continues without stopping, while Luke makes gestures of defiance to whoever the enemy may be. As he leaves, he does not discover that the enemy is very close to them, camouflaged among the foliage on the ground. The group continues and reaches their destination, an area with a cabin in the middle of the forest. They enter the place and check if it is empty. They spend time there and talk about the events, questioning each other about the letter on the sign. They mention some names, but Steve remembers David. At this moment, they realize that all of this is related to the inmate's death and believe that the young man's father is hunting them on purpose. Lindsay accuses Steve of what is happening to them, claiming that what they did was the reason the young man decided to stop living. Steve notes that the young man knows something and confronts him along with Luke. With no choice, Lindsay just tells that David used to say he loved his father, but always said that he was once a soldier and that he was a disturbed man who did crazy things. After suspecting who the enemy is, the girls, confident, say that they are safe, but Luke asserts that if the man is leaving clues for the young people to know him, that means he will not allow anyone to leave there alive. As everyone is tired, they rest a little. Later, Jennifer goes out to relieve herself, and when she returns, she encounters Blue at the entrance. He is attracted to her and wants to take advantage of the moment alone. She dismisses him, but he does not accept the dismissal and knocks her down, wanting to touch her inappropriately. Fortunately, Louis arrives and knocks the young man down, hitting him for the disrespectful behavior towards Jennifer. The others arrive and end the fighting. When Louis threatens him, Blue turns and walks away from the others, walking through the tall grass, which is not a good sign. Soon, a bear trap injures his leg. Luke realizes that there are other traps around the man and needs to be cautious when going to help him. Mandy goes with him and supports him standing so that Luke can help him. However, hearing that the dogs are coming, the young man panics and pulls his leg, consequently breaking his foot. Without support, he ends up falling forward, where there was another trap, and ends up being fatally wounded by the weapon. The two then run back inside and take cover from flaming arrow shots that are now on fire. As a fire starts inside the cabin, the young men begin to run away. Running through the forest, Lindsay falls and is left behind. Minutes later, the others follow the river to try to shake off the dogs. The group of young people follows the plains of the island and heads south. At one point, they hear noise from branches, and when they approach to see who it is, discover that Louise is still alive, but very injured, unable to walk. She tells the young people that they need to leave the island and asks them to find the boat on the beach. They then follow her direction and go to the beach to look for the boat. The group splits up and begins the search along the shore. Meanwhile, Louise is hiding in a corner of the forest, but what she does not know is that the enemy is hiding very well. He emerges behind her and, unfortunately, finishes her off with his blade. Back to Steve's duo. It doesn't take long before they find the small boat. The inmate Steve wants to leave without the others, which Lewis is against, even regarding Jennifer's life. However, thinking about their survival, they push the boat into the water. When the others see the scene from afar, they run desperately to reach them before they leave. However, the two realize that the fuel line for the motor has been cut, and the leak runs into the interior of the vessel, which means they are not safe inside. Suddenly, the enemy man appears at the top of the hill and shoots a flaming arrow inside the boat, forcing them to leave. The girls realize that the animals are also approaching them, and then they need to run into the water, even though Jennifer does not know how to swim. The other two climb the rocks alongside, and soon the still-alive Lindsay appears at the top, but prefers not to help them after everything the despicable ones have done to him. However, it does not take long for them to climb the slope and run after the young man. However, the sound of dogs approaching makes them leave the young man behind and hide in a small cave. Lindsay tries to enter, but Steve blocks him, using him as a barrier so that one of the dogs does not come in. The animal injures the young man, but its owner's whistle attracts it back. Meanwhile, on the beach, one of the dogs also leaves from guarding the exit of the others from the water, allowing Luke to emerge and face the other animal alone with his knife. The young man, after many bites, finishes off the animal and is able to get out of the water, leaving the area immediately. Minutes later, they return to the spot where Louise was, but do not find her. Then, they reunite with the others again. While resting by a campfire, Mandy hears something deeper in the forest and, with stakes in hand, goes to check. But what they find is only Louise's head hanging on a stake, with David's name written on the forehead. When Luke returns with the dead dog, he is notified about what they did to Louise and, wanting to take out his fury in kind, grabs the head of the dead animal, climbs the nearby mountain, and screams to attract the enemy, so he can see that he has hung one of his animal's heads on a stake. The next day, the group wakes up and Luke still has not returned. Steve ends up confronting Mandy, wanting other things, but the girl wants nothing to do with him and insults him. He, disturbed, knocks her to the ground and hurts her. Fortunately, Lewis, at Jennifer's request, helps the girl and grabs crazy Steve. Then, they discover that Mandy has fled. Angry, Jennifer confronts Steve, blaming him for the events, and says that he is alone, as now Lewis is with her and will do what she asks. Steve goes crazy and grabs a sharp stake, stabbing it into his partner's chest, unfortunately killing him. Frightened, Jennifer runs for her life. Unfortunately, unaware of the forest, she stumbles into a trap and gets suspended high by a rope over a pool of fuel that will catch fire. Meanwhile, still searching for a way off the island, Luke finds the enemy's boat. He goes to the boat and finds an axe and some materials. Back to Jennifer, she asks for help, but it is Steve who finds her, and he decides not to help the girl, leaving her there to die in the flames. Hours later, Steve finds Lindsay and decides to use him as an offering to David's father, John, stating that he is delivering the one responsible for the boy's death. However, John is not lenient, and after asking about his son's death, orders Steve to do the same, knowing that they participated in David's decline. Steve grabs the knife, but instead of trying it on himself, he confronts David's father, mocking the son he had, and then throws the blade at him. In a quick action, John shoots an arrow and kills Steve. When John approaches the tied-up Lindsay, he frees him, and here it is discovered that he helped deliver the other young men. Seeing the injured young man, John asks him to return to the boat and wait there while he takes care of the survivors. All this scene is seen by Mandy, who is surprised by the partnership between the two. Suddenly, Luke appears there in the old monastery and confronts John. He asks for a fair fight, and without weapons, John moves to confront Luke, who, being smart, has left a weapon ready to attack his enemy. He injures John in the shoulder, but this, being a knife specialist, wounds his opponent's arm. The fight between the two is tense, and serious injuries are inflicted on John. He flees the scene while Luke grabs John's crossbow and chases him. Heading toward the boat, near the cliff, Lindsay is surprised by Mandy, who questions him about the tragic events among the group. Lindsay confesses that he was the one who called John to the island and told of the evils they did to him and David. Mandy says that the girls had nothing to do with them, but the young man says that they were just in the wrong place and will be victims just the same. Angrily, Mandy strikes him with a wooden stake and knocks him off the cliff, causing his death. Back in the confrontation between John and Luke, the young man chases David's father to the beach, but the latter, very injured, falls powerless to continue. Luke decides to leave him there and returns to the boat, and on the way meets Mandy. The film ends with the duo returning to the mainland, knowing that, for society, they died there on that island.